the world's longest running democracy, celebrating its 250th anniversary. Quite the milestone for a United States that to many Europeans, well, still seems like a new world. Since 1789, it's been governed under the same constitution, a time span where here in France we've had 5 republics, 3 monarchies, 3 dictatorships if you include Nazi occupation. So what is the significance of this 4th of July? Is it about 1776 and the birth of a nation, remembrance of 2.5 centuries of events that shaped the common present, the celebration of the world's premier superpower, the one that won the Cold War, dominated trade and finance, and gave the world so much music, movies, and great literature? At a time when the current president's all for loosening traditional alliances, where global admiration for democracy in America seems to be plummeting, why does the U.S. seem to have changed so suddenly and so much? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about the blow-up over the 250th, and with us from New York City, he's a public school history teacher, Robert Nelson. Welcome to the France 24 debate.
Thank you for having me.
He's back from New Orleans, Franco-American attorney Charles Capitas. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Hin Zian is French. You went to the U.S. for university and wound up starting a career as in policy analyst and advisor.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thanks for being with us again.
Thank you for having me.
If you're on the go, by the way, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. So both of panelists here present, born after 1976, when there was the bicentennial, which I remember well, and it was a different time. We'll get to that in a moment. But before we do, let me begin with you, Charles.
Yes.
What does July 4th just mean to you? What is the 4th of July mean?
For me, like all other Americans my age or a little older.
Just for you.
For me, but I see it as with the rest of my people. 4th of July reminds me of getting drunk, going out on vacation, and taking those days to enjoy with family and with friends. And that's what it's all about, because
Americans have less holidays, so when they have a vacation day, it's a big one.
Exactly. We only have 2 weeks of holiday, official. So this is a good excuse to go out and kind of enjoy the 250th anniversary.
On any other year, Robert Nelson, when you see the 4th of July coming up, what are your thoughts?
I think similar to what Charles said, I think it's mostly an opportunity to grill, to barbecue, to enjoy time with friends and family. I mean, of course, it's sort of drenched in a vague American nationalism, but I would say for the majority of Americans, the 4th of July is a relatively depoliticized holiday. And I do think that's part of why President Trump's, attempt to put his own stamp on it is sort of failing.
It's in any case very different. We'll get back to Donald Trump in a moment, but it's very different from Bastille Day. France, which once bankrolled and fought alongside George Washington's army, who gifted the U.S. the Statue of Liberty in honor of the centennial birthday, sending to New York on Wednesday the same Patrouille de France Air Force squadron that will, there you see them, that will fly over the Champs-Élysées on Bastille Day, July 14th, with those red, white, and blue plumes of smoke. Bastille Day, where preparations are already underway. You can see them around the Arc de Triomphe here in Paris for the big annual military parade. Now, it's replete. Bastille Day, Hin Zian, it's got fireworks, it's got firemen's balls. It's also, though, every year there's a traditional interview of the French president. So would you say that traditionally Bastille Day is perhaps a more political event than is the 4th of July?
4th of July. Well, at least Bastille Day has been for French people for a few centuries now the opportunity to get together around the idea of nation, because France is an old country, unlike America, and we've had a lot of divisions, we've had a lot of ups and downs, and the 14th of July is the opportunity for us to come back and to remember that we're all French and we can get together at this particular occasion. So it's not very politicized. However, it is an opportunity for the president to do what the Constitution lets him do. It means take care of his I wouldn't say enlightened view, but at least to be the referee who decides for everybody and who is at least on top and who is not bound by any partisanship.
Because
so
it's
I would
interesting
say
because you're hearing here the two Americans on the panel.
we're talking about getting beers and having fun.
having a barbecue. In France, it's about a military parade followed by a political interview.
Yes, but it's not politicized. It is. It has a philosophical meaning as a nation. It gets us together. I remember when I was a kid, my mom brought me to the Champs-Élysées, and we used to watch all those military operations and military troops, all the troops getting together and showing to the country what it means also to be French.
So how different is it from the 4th of July,
not
which you've experienced?
politicized, but philosophical. It's more
and how different is it to the
philosophical.
4th of July, which you've
Well,
experienced?
I think from what I've experienced, the 4th of July is effectively less philosophical, at least from what I saw when I was in the USA. But in France, you also have some people who just like to have fun and to get a beer and to go for a barbecue. It's just that there is a part of the population who likes to go out and meet with soldiers, meet with generals and officers, and take this time to actually remind ourselves what it means to be French and to be part of this one nation.
Charles, were you all about the firemen's balls?
I mean,
and
the fireman's bowl, that's for the ladies. They love that. That's not my thing, but...
there are men, too, go dancing.
I know,
Go
absolutely,
to the
but I
firehouses.
know all my girlfriends are, oh my God, we have to go there. You know, even the Americans, they just come to the 14th of July just to see the firemen. And I don't blame them. They're beautiful. But let's see, like July 4th and July 14th, they're kind of the same. My friends, I was just talking to them today about it, discussing about what we were going to talk about today. It's also about going out, having beers, watching the fireworks, partying. It's an excuse for everyone to get together. And I don't see that being politicized. I think the main reason why it's politicized, I think, is because of the défilé, the big military parade that's happening. I think that's what makes it more politicized, I believe. Also, with the French president speaking at the end of the day, I can understand that. But for common French people, and I've lived here, it's just an excuse to all gather around and enjoy the summer.
Now, Robert Nelson, the current occupant of the White House, he was the guest of honor one year, because you always have a foreign head of state who's a guest of honor at Bastille Day. He liked what he saw, and he's kind of trying to institute something similar. How does that go down, though?
Yeah, he's a fan of military parades and sort of the pageantry of American nationalism. But, American nationalism and French nationalism, have a lot in common in the sense that they're both civic nationalisms, right? And as was mentioned in the intro, France has had several republics and monarchies since the storming of the Bastille. But, both of these countries require renewal of civic identity over time through shared political experiences, and I think I actually would challenge that framing. The United States had a civil war, right, and in many ways a civil rights movement in the 1960s. So, although the Constitution that shapes our country and our government and our state has, retained some continuity over time, there have been major, the American Civil War was a revolution, right? It saw, mass destruction across the states. It saw a series of new amendments to the constitutions that reshaped what it meant to be citizenship, meant to be a citizen of this country. And so I do think, nations require these sort of civic national rituals. But again, I think that Donald Trump misreads and misunderstands where the source of power comes from. And that, military parades, he tried one, I believe, at his second inauguration that, again, didn't go down very well among the American population. So I think his source of power does not stem from the sort of pageantry that he clearly loves, right? I mean, he's a man of professional wrestling and reality TV, and he loves pageantry, but he doesn't quite seem to understand how to deploy it at the national scale in the United States.
Let's talk about the pulse of the nation. This is a big landmark, a 250th, and for the bicentennial of U.S. Independence back in 1976, July the 4th. I remember the tall ships that sailed in New York Harbor. It followed a buildup that lasted years. There'd been blue ribbon panels as far back as 1971 for to prepare. Commemorative stamps had been issued. Activities at schools, public libraries. And, Robert Nelson, it followed a period when you had the deep divisions. The United States had been divided after the race riots of the 1960s, the Vietnam War. That reflection back then was seen as a moment where Americans were trying to get over a lot of these things at the same time and looking for that common ground. When you think back to 1976, what are your thoughts about this moment in time for the United States?
I think this 250th anniversary will not be remembered particularly strongly. I think that the bicentennial, I was not born in 1976, but, speaking to my parents or, coworkers who remember that time, it was meaningful, and it was a process of meaning making. I would actually say the United States was more divided politically in 1976 than it is today. It was in the wake of Watergate. There was regular political terrorism in the United States throughout the 1970s, right? It had only just, in quite recent memory, Black Americans had become full citizens of the United States, right? So I would say in many ways, the United States was more explosively politically divided in the 1970s. However, I do think that Americans in the 1970s did share much more than today, a sense that there was possibility for growth and a better life for Americans than there are today. I think living in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, the initial excitement and then disappointment of the Obama administration, the coming of Trump, and all that's followed, I think most Americans are not optimistic that their children, or if they are young, that they in their future will live a better life than their parents. And I think that is a key difference between now and 1976. While the occupant of the White House is clearly a central feature of that, it's not like Gerald Ford in 1976 was a particularly popular president. So I think, again, while political leadership at the top matters, I do think there is less optimism among the American population here in 2026 about the future of the country. Although, we can speak more later, I think there are some reasons to be optimistic, some political openings that are emerging.
All right, important points there made by Robert Nelson and Zian. First of all, that people always think it was a golden age before where everybody got along, and actually that's not the case. And the second one is in the United States. And again, I hark back to when you first went there. You first went there at university. You'd never been before to the U.S.?
No, it was the first time.
And did you get a sense of this sort of feeling of manifest destiny that Americans could, can do anything if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and you can be aspirational. You too can become president of the United States. Was the feeling many people had. Even
it was I'd say it was a mixed feeling. It was both before going to the USA, I worked with Americans, and my boss was appointed at the Obama administration, so I got a taste of what it was like to be American. And Americans do have this mindset that gives opportunities to people despite, no matter their gender or their age, or what matters is really grit, determination, and the willingness to succeed. And that's something that I saw in Americans.
And this isn't a million years ago. This is a decade ago.
I don't know. It was barely a decade ago. And I know that Americans are like that. But going there, and I actually lived in Texas, you also have this mixed feeling that there were divisions. And when I was there, it was the year Donald Trump got elected. And I live in Austin, which is obviously a Democratic city, but in a Republican state. And so you have a lot of friends I had a lot of friends who voted Democrat, but whose families voted Republican. So you had this infighting, and you could see this American paradox where it was just incredible open-mindedness, the ability to give opportunity to other people to go beyond their background, they look like, what they can do, and to just really look at the person in front of you. But at the same time, you have this type of tension between conservatism and liberalism. And I think it was Schlesinger who said that Americans are philosophically philosophically conservative and practically liberal. And that's something that I could really see and feel in the way people spoke and the way people behaved. And I kept that with me. And coming back to France, it really gave me a very special understanding of America, especially living in Texas.
Charles Capita is schooled in Paris, but you do your university in New Orleans.
In New Orleans, at Tulane University.
And so...
and law school.
So Hin was describing her experience when Trump was first elected.
I was
What
there.
about when Trump was the second election? And again, did Americans retain this aspirational sort of vibe that Hind was describing?
No. After Biden and I'm seeing Trump win. Everyone around me, a lot of people. I mean, not the rest of the country, not everyone in the country, but there was a sense of we don't know what the future is looking like. I think during the Obama administration and the early Trump administration, there was kind of an idea of like, there's maybe some hope in the future, but right now there is no idea of what it is going to be in a year. And following with what Robert was saying that some similarities with today. Today, right now, it's reminding me of the Gilded Age, the Gilded Era of 1860 to 1890, when massive wealth was just culminating and it was just getting more and more, and people were getting poorer and poorer. The same thing is happening right now. Trump is a pre-Teddy Roosevelt president where focusing only on the wealth, focusing only on the wealthy. And I think to answer your specific question is that with him becoming president again, he has been focusing only on making his friends richer, focusing on himself getting richer. And I think people right now especially are feeling like there is no real future for them because nothing is going, there's lack of jobs. There's a lack of, everything's getting more expensive. So I think with Trump's situation right now, with him, everything that he's doing, the most corrupt president we've ever seen in our lives, or even America.
Right, but we shouldn't reduce the conversation to one person, even if it is the president of the United States.
Well, no, this has been a systemic issue, even starting with Obama and beforehand. I mean, let me talk about the lawyer in the room. I'm going to explain this. Easy enough. 2010, I believe, Citizens United. This was a landmark decision from the Supreme Court that decided that pretty much a corporation was an individual, which meant that an individual corporation could put as much money as they wanted. 2 days ago, there was two landmark decisions. One good one, birthright. What birthright decision? People born in America are Americans. But the second one was a
because that's in the Constitution.
Yes, it is.
14th Amendment.
It is. However, there's a second one that was not good for the people, and that actually made it worse on corporate money going into politics, where now there is an unlimited amount of money that can go into it. So when people my age, trying to have change, not having Trump as president or these politicians that are not in our favor, this is really just a blow in the face of really going back to the Gilded Age, where everything is getting worse for the common man and richer people are getting more and more rich. And there's going to be a point when we're already seeing with Mamdani in New York and Colorado, young people are having enough of it. And you can see it. It's just history repeats itself. And the same thing is happening now.
So right now you've got docking in New York Harbor on Tuesday, the USS Arlington, one of several Navy vessels. I talked about the tall ships of 1976. You're going to have a similar display. These ships are going to sail past the Statue of Liberty on Independence Day. 48 tall ships, 20 nations will be taking part. It's a big international event. What's going to happen?
Pageantry.
Right. But is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, I don't think it's a bad or a good thing. I think it's not. This is, again, it's 4th of July, 250 years of an experiment, which is called the United States of America. Great. But at the end of the day, there's July 5th tomorrow. And whenever Saturday is July 4th. July 5th is the next day. Life goes on. We still have Donald Trump as president. There's special interests in our politics, and people are starting to have enough of it.
All right, this year's commemorations.
And if I
go ahead, please, Robert Nelson.
I mean, if I may, I think the ships are a really interesting image, right? Because there's a clear contrast between 20 nations sending ships to New York City, to sail past the Statue of Liberty. How many nations supported the United States in its recent war against Iran, right? So you see a key divergence, right, between symbolism, right, and the actual crisis of American hegemony and American empire, which we see, increasingly rogue elites in, Trump, his circle of advisors, Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, right? People launching, ill-conceived wars, right, that make these powers look increasingly like rogue states. And so, I'm glad that, nations, want to send cool-looking ships to New York to New York Harbor, but I'm also glad that they don't want to send them to the Strait of Hormuz, to back up the United States in an illegal, ill-conceived, and counterproductive war that's only throwing American hegemony and global capitalism into further crisis.
Yeah, this year's commemorations of the 250th kicking off with a cage fight. The U.S. Health Secretary, nephew to former U.S. President John F. Kennedy, tweeting this, with Cheryl celebrating America's 250th birthday at the UFC fight. That's an actual tweet. The U.S. president staging the event on the White House lawn, a surprising display. It left many on this side of the Atlantic, how shall we say, puzzled. Republicans blasting domestic critics of the event as elitist and out of touch with what ordinary Americans want. Now, Robert, you began this conversation by agreeing with Charles that saying that the 4th of July, generally, it's an opportunity to let off a bit of steam and grill a few burgers and vegetables. But so is there anything wrong with staging this kind of, this event on the White House lawn?
I mean, to put it in moral perspective, it's certainly not wrong when compared to, bombing a girls' school in Iran or supporting genocide in Gaza. But I think it's, relatively tasteless, and it's not. I actually think that's it's quite a projection from Republican elites. More Americans follow tennis than follow the UFC and mixed martial arts, right? So, there are many Americans for whom mixed martial arts are, important and a sport they care about. Donald Trump, of course, comes from, has deep roots in the world of boxing and, competitive combat sports. And, that's a fine thing to celebrate if you want to, I don't think it's a particularly, again,
in any
the
case,
scale
Robert,
of the things that the United States is. Yeah.
We're far away from talking about what we thought of, and Hin mentioned it at the outset, which is a day to talk about civics and what brings together a nation. And when you look at that past, in the last days, we've seen courts are considering this ban on U.S. parklands of mentioning things like slavery. Your thoughts on whether or not, and I'm speaking to the history teacher here, whether or not it's become politically charged teaching history in high school?
Of course, because the American version of civic nationalism contains multitudes, right? Our founding fathers, many of them were slave owners, right? In many respects, the American Revolution was fought because the British monarchy was afraid of the destabilization that would come from westward expansion into indigenous lands, right? So a sort of white supremacist, settler colonial, violent tradition is one key strand of American civic nationalism. But it's a large and complicated country. And so is resistance to those things and a struggle from below to sort of, fulfilling the strands of the promise, within the Declaration of Independence and other founding documents. Trump
Robert,
and the Republican right
there is
going
no
back
national,
a long way.
There is no national curriculum
in
the United States. Right. It's each state, right, that determines what's taught in public schools. How does it work in New York when it comes to things like what happened to Native Americans, when it comes to slavery, as you mentioned it, when it comes to what happened in the past, how American independence came about? Do you have, is the curriculum straightforward? What's it like?
The New York State Board of Regents is the body that oversees, the standardized tests for graduation and curriculum in New York State. And, while I may have some quibbles with some things, in general, it paints a broadly accurate story of, of the American founding, and and the injustices that shaped the United States from the very beginning. But yeah, again, in general, I think it would be better to have a national curriculum. But I suppose in times like the present, I am also happy to be living and teaching in a state where the curriculum accurately reflects the history of the country we live in.
Hinzian, we've seen arguments in this country in the past years over whether or not France should apologize for colonialism. And the political divide is very sharp on that one. We know that in high school textbooks, you have in the upper grades, they talking about the Algerian War of Independence, but it's generally late in the semester and there isn't much time to deal with it. It's not something that's talked about a lot. The Paris Commune, I mean, those are just some examples of controversial moments in France's common narrative. Is it different from the United States?
Well, I think it is similar. It's not exactly the same, but it is similar in the way that this nation has been shaped by beautiful moments, glorious moments, but also moments of utter darkness. They can talk about slavery. We can talk about colonization. We can talk about women's rights, for example, in this country, where until the 60s, you couldn't actually have your own money and you have your own bank account as a woman in this country. So I would say, as maybe the slight difference, the small difference would be because France has had a larger history. It's a much older country, it has had the opportunity to reinvent itself and to try to do something and to try to do things differently. So that's maybe the wisdom of having maybe a bit more centuries of life. But I would say those things are similar and they're extremely important for the nation. It's extremely important to talk about those things. It's not for me to say if a country should apologize or not, but I believe it is essential to talk about those things because that's the history of the country. The history of France doesn't start in 1789, just as, well, America's a bit different because it actually does start in 1776 officially, but at least in France, it's a country where you have thousands of years of history that need to be looked at very lucidly and very calmly. And as long as we haven't been able to do that, we're talking about France, we can also talk about the UK or other European powers or other countries at all, who haven't been able to do some thinking on their own history because they assume that doing that thinking or considering some dark pages of history would look like some kind of loss or defeat. It's actually the opposite, I believe.
When you go to Texas for university, did you get a sense that they looked at, because you heard what Robert was saying about New York State, did you get a sense they looked at their past differently there?
Oh, that's a good question. So the thing that struck me the most when I was in Texas, and this actually goes back to American identity, and after 250 years, for me, there is a huge debate around what is American identity. And typically, American identity since the foundation has been, at least the majoritarian culture of America, has been Anglo-Saxon, more precisely Anglo-Protestant. And with the waves of immigration, specifically from Mexico, but from Latin America, you have a change in the American identity that is going to be imposed. And a lot of geopolitical analysts are saying, oh, maybe in 50 years or 100 years, all of the South of America is going to be Spanish-speaking. And we have to remember that 5 American states, used to be part of Mexico not so long ago, about 200 years ago. So this all asks the question is, does being American mean that you are Anglo-Protestant? And that's what Samuel Huntington said in his book about the future of America as a geopolitical power. Or does it mean that you have other populations that also have the right to say they're American? And that's the entire idea or the entire problem that was caused by the show, the Super Bowl show, which was entirely celebrating Latin American culture, Latino culture of Latinos who were born in the USA and who are Americans. And it was rejected by MAGA supporters and by the American president. Yeah, this year's Super Bowl with Bad Bunny, the show that was entirely in Spanish and that celebrated Latin America, and it was rejected because there is this idea deeply entrenched in American culture that American culture equals Anglo-Saxon culture. And that is actually a big question for the future for me. And I think eventually Anglo-Saxon culture is going to have to accept that there are other types of cultures in the USA, especially with the demography that is changing. You have more and more Latin Americans and Hispanics who are living in the USA.
Right. And again, when you go to in 1776, Louisiana was not American or British. It was Spanish then French. And
Yes.
and do people down there look at their past and recognize it, or do they
Absolutely.
or do they ignore the fact that they were once
no.
not?
We are a melting pot in Louisiana, specifically New Orleans, and that's something I love about that city. It's something that's very different from anywhere around the country, I would say. Also, I mean, look, Anglo-Saxon, I do agree with that, but I mean, America's also had, and this is, I'm speaking still about New Orleans, Italians, Greeks, I mean, Irish, I mean,
No, culture, not
culture.
people, culture.
I mean, even
Anglo-Saxon culture.
they were still like Italians were still considered. I mean, they were treated worse than how Mexicans or Latinos are today. I mean, they were at the bottom of the food chain.
Yeah. So the United States is not a monolith.
It's they've always been. It's like, oh, there's a new community coming in. We're gonna. I'm not saying where, but that's how America is. They're a very racist country. It just happens. It's happened to the Italians, the Irish. It's always like that. And but I needed to say that because I think that's an important
Yeah, there
thing.
were
It's
brutal racial quotas in the
huge,
1920s.
Huge. I mean, for since the beginning. So it's like this time, weirdly enough, it's against the Mexicans, it's against the Latinos, and it's just this.
Well, that's the basis of Anglo-Saxon culture. If you assume that America is Anglo-Saxon, you assume that Anglo-Saxons should have more rights than the others, and that's what happened in America for a long time, and that's the problem of racism in America. I think that's the basis.
But going back to, I don't know if that's the basis, but I would say that. No, actually, I wouldn't. I don't know. Let's say that I don't know. But in New Orleans, it's a melting pot. And yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, coinciding with the 250th, the July 4th opening of the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library in North Dakota's Badlands on Wednesday, the U.S. president was often hailed the early 20th century president, showing up. Donald Trump, a fan of his initiating construction of the Panama Canal, most notably. Trump, who opposed the removal of the statue of the fellow New York-born president in 2022 from the front steps of the Museum of Natural History in Manhattan. The bronze statue of Roosevelt on horseback, flanked by a Native American man and an African man deemed racist and out of touch with the times. That was, again, 2022. Robert Nelson, that seems like a long time ago. And it's interesting, when Donald Trump shows up in North Dakota to pay homage to Theodore Roosevelt, what's the message there?
The message is one of, white American masculine strength and its linkage to the expansion of American empire. I mean, the settler colonization of the American West, right, and the expansion of the American empire into the Caribbean and Latin America is a huge part of the story of people like Teddy Roosevelt. And I do think it's important, to reconcile or to contest the public legacy of figures like Roosevelt and the statues. Although again, and this relates to the comment that I made earlier about the ships, symbolism is certainly important, right? But there are major crises on Native American reservations and among Native Americans living in American cities, right? There are the effects of American empire are not over in Panama or the Caribbean or Latin America. I mean, you were speaking about the legacies of French colonialism before. I mean, it's not just the legacies and apologizing. There's the CFA franc. There's Vincent Bolloré, right? There, these countries maintain, the legacy of colonialism. I think actually puts things in the past in a semi-comfortable way that are not actually quite in the past.
Yeah, and with it again, we're heading towards this July 4th, where what is for certain is that the United States is polarized. And now there's this debate that's raged in Brazil recently. Now in Colombia, we saw with the recent presidential election, and that is appropriation of national football jerseys and national flags. The rest of the population feeling conflicted and divided over displaying said flag, something that Americans love to do much more than here in France and on their front porches normally.
I love the American flag. I love the whole concept of it. I love America.
Well, I used to fly it all the time, especially on holidays that we celebrated the country. I have not flown my flag the last year.
That woman in Detroit, bitter, she says, Hinzian, that she doesn't like the way that the current administration treats minorities. But when you first saw these flying of the flags, which we started to see in France only in 1998 when the French won the World Cup in football.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's so flying the flag became a taboo in a country like France, so it is considered to be right wing or right wingish if you fly the flag, which is not the same thing in the USA. And I think I don't see the problem with this thing. But this specific thing, I think, is actually a good thing. It means that they're proud of being American and they're proud of their roots and they're proud of what they've been able to accomplish as a nation for all those years. The problem is more in what stays and what this flag stands for. Does it stand for liberty? Does it stand for the pursuit of happiness and opportunity for all? Or does it stand for something else? Does it stand just for freedom for some people, for some Americans, but not for some others, opportunity for some Americans, but not for others, or maybe just, freedom, life, and opportunity for Americans and not for the rest of the world? And I think this flag, it is a source of pride for many Americans. It is also a source of hatred in many parts of the world. And we can talk about West Asia, we can talk about countries like Iraq, we can talk about countries like Afghanistan, like Iran, but also other countries in Latin America where seeing this flag became a synonym of American imperialism. And this is also a big deal. So the flag, of course, is a source of pride. It should be a source of pride for everybody, no matter where they're from, American or not. But we also should be aware of the fact that the American flag, unfortunately, because of the wars, foreign wars of the American forces, has also been the source of hatred elsewhere.
Robert Nelson, I know in New York they weren't that big on flag waving until 9/11, 2001. Then we started to see more of them. What's it like today where you are?
Well, you see American flags. It's also the World Cup, and New York is a city of immigrants, so you see flags of quite a bit of countries. There are a lot of Uzbek and Ecuadorian migrants in my neighborhood. So you see a lot of different flags. I think one thing that I would say about the American flag is, well, flags in general, right? These are political symbols, and the whole point of a symbol is that it conveys meaning, and meaning changes over time, right? So it is both. I think it's appropriate for people to be proud of the American flag, and I think it's also appropriate for people to in the United States to not want to claim the American flag. And one thing that I will say that I do appreciate about 1776 and the American Revolution and Jour de la Bastille and 14 is like states and governments are creations of human beings. They can be changed, right? The leader of the American Socialist Party, Eugene V. Debs, in the early 1900s, who was imprisoned by the United States for speaking out against our involvement in World War I. He once gave a speech in the year 1901 on the 4th of July saying, he actually liked the 4th of July because he, quote, it breathes the spirit of revolution, right? So I think, these debates about symbols are open-ended and they will continue to exist as long as, human beings create societies with each other. But I think it's important, as our political leaders in the United States insist on, things that like healthcare for all or union representation, right? That those things are impossible dreams, right? It's a reminder that states and societies are the creations of human beings. And they are subject to change when we can, display the political will to change them.
Yeah, societies evolved. The U.S. Constitution less so. It's been sometimes amendment, but getting 2/3 of Congress and 2/3 of the 50 state legislatures to agree on anything these days Well, that's kind of hard. In fact, the last time an amendment was approved, Charles Capitas, was 50 years ago, 1976. You know, again, we're on the Fifth Republic, and some candidates here in France argue for a sixth. But there's something sacrosanct about a constitution that's really hard to amend or to modify.
And I think rightfully so. I think it's important to have that. I do believe there might need some change, but I mean, right now, nothing's going to be changed unless we change completely our politics. Depends on, we need to get less divided and more united. It's not going to change anything. We're not going to be changing the Constitution anytime soon. I can be honest on that. With the temper of the country, that's not going to happen.
And that Constitution is more solid than any one person?
I believe. Look, if you really want, want my real honest opinion about it, we have a man in power right now that is he's playing around a little bit, and I believe that there's a lot that's going to be changing with the elections that's going to come up.
Hinzian, is the U.S. Constitution got enough, as we say in French, backbone to withstand what's happening?
I don't know. I think we're going to need some time. America is a young country, and it is barely going through its adolescence, and I think we're going to have to wait another 50 or 100 years to know if this is a long-term kind of thing. But I think at least it was well thought out because it's been able to live out for 250 years despite many, many hardships. But I really do believe that, you know, beyond what happens at the institutional level, it's the people. And American people, I think, if they get together and they have the right leaders, they can still do amazing things.
All right, let's go around the table quickly about this one. One long-standing tradition of big anniversary dates in the U.S. are time capsules, where present-day mementos are buried for future generations to unlock. Last week saw a rare display of bipartisanship on Capitol Hill as majority and minority leaders of the House of Representatives stood side by side to show off the time capsule they're going to bury. It's going to be opened in another 250 years. Much of what the states submitted were letters, postcards, poems, and other printed materials. Robert Nelson, what would you put in a time capsule for future generations?
Well, this is a hopeful one, but I suppose I would put in a newspaper the day after the election of Zoran Mamdani in New York City. I think he offers, I think if the United States is going to change in a positive direction, I think if the United States is going to do right by Americans here at home and cooperate globally and wind down American conflict abroad and move towards cooperation, then, he obviously he's just one person, but the political tendency he represents and the reinvigoration of hope among the American population is going to be a necessary part of that.
All right. Well, you've won a lot of fans in the newsroom by saying you would put a physical copy of a newspaper in these times of digital nativism inside that time capsule. Charles Capitas, what would you put in?
For me, if it's chilled correctly, a good bottle of red wine.
250.
Yeah, who knows?
I don't know if I'd open that.
That's a good question. A book, a French book. I don't know which one, but something that talks about freedom, about the fact that that's the best government that we can have.
Hinzian, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Charles Capitas. Robert Nelson for being with us from New York City. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you, Robert.